At 2:23 a.m., the Black Sea was silent. No lights, no engines, only the hiss of waves under a moonless sky. That calm was moments from breaking. Three small wooden drones, no bigger than jet skis, built from plywood and spare parts, cut across Russian-monitored waters at 180 kilometers per hour. Their target wasn't a warship or submarine, but something more dangerous. A Russian spy vessel floating 15 miles off Novorossiysk. It had spent 6 weeks eavesdropping on Ukraine's drone launches, tracking every signal and frequency, and was days away from predicting strikes before they happened. If it succeeded, Ukraine's drone war would be crippled. So, in the still dark, the Ukrainians launched their counterattack. No jets, no missiles, just 3 wooden ghosts gliding 3 meters above the sea, nearly invisible to radar and heat sensors, moving toward a target that had no idea death was coming. These weren't ordinary drones. They were FP-1s, handmade naval drones built not to overpower, but to outthink. Every circuit, screw, and sheet of plywood was crafted for deception. The mission wasn't simple destruction. It was a game of intelligence, patience, and misdirection. Russian radar operators were watching, their screens glowing with endless blips of ocean noise. Overhead, a 4-post R reconnaissance drone patrolled its usual circuit, scanning for anything unusual. At 2:45 a.m., it detected a faint heat spike, 3 small dots moving east at low altitude. "Could be birds," an operator said. Then the dots vanished into the waves. They didn't know those birds were already locked onto the most important Russian vessel in the region. This wasn't brute force. It was chess, and the first moves had just been played. That ship was no ordinary patrol craft. To outsiders, it looked routine, gray hull, steady course, but beneath the surface it was a weapon of silence. Its R-381T intelligence arrays could detect a single encrypted transmission hundreds of kilometers away. It was Russia's ear to the sea, quietly recording every Ukrainian signal and decoding their patterns. Inside, under red light, crews sat at rows of consoles, analyzing frequencies and movements. For 6 weeks, it had listened and learned. Ukrainian commanders realized that if this ship stayed operational, surprise, their only real advantage, would disappear. But the ship was ringed with defenses, patrol boats, helicopters, coastal radar. Any large approach would trigger alarms. They needed a weapon small enough to slip through, yet smart enough to strike true. So Ukrainian engineers tried something no doctrine could predict: wooden drones invisible to radar. Their goal wasn't only to destroy, it was to humiliate, to prove that intelligence can be undone with ingenuity. By late summer, Ukraine had a plan. The spy ship had become predictable. Same patrol route, same timing, same arrogance. And predictability, in war, is suicide. At 2:23 a.m., 3 FP-1s launched from a hidden coastal site. Each carried a small camera, a crude GPS, and a warhead meant to blind, not sink. Meanwhile, a second act prepared to play, a decoy swarm designed to pull every Russian eye away from the real attack. As the FP-1s raced east, Russian surveillance caught faint echoes and temperature spikes, but dismissed them as noise. That decision would cost them dearly. 20 minutes later, the drones skimmed 3 meters above the water, invisible to radar. Their plywood frames gave off no metallic signature, and the cool sea air equalized their temperature with the waves, erasing their infrared trails. To radar tuned for metal aircraft, they were ghosts. The 4-post R lost sight of them, labeling the contacts possible birds. It wasn't luck. It was design. The FP-1s hugged the ocean's radar clutter, hidden by nature itself. But stealth alone wasn't enough. To pull the trap fully, Ukraine needed the Russians to look elsewhere, to believe a massive attack was coming from the opposite direction. At 3:30 a.m., more than a dozen cheap boats and modified jet skis surged from hidden coves. They broadcast fake drone signals, moved in believable formations, even emitted heat signatures like real attack craft. On Russian radar, it looked like a full-scale swarm. Helicopters scrambled from Novorossiysk, their rotors thumping westward toward the decoys. Doctrine demanded they respond to visible threats first, and they obeyed it perfectly. Every minute they flew away was one more minute of safety for the real attackers. Patrol boats revved engines, chasing false targets. The sky filled with static, the sea churned with noise, and the FP-1s slipped silently through the chaos. By the time the Russians realized the decoys weren't striking, they were hundreds of kilometers off course and low on fuel. The spy ship was alone. The Ukrainians had timed everything to radar rhythm. Russian operators thought their network flawless, but every rotation left a 4-second gap, an invisible corridor when two radar beams turned away from each other. At 4:47 a.m., the first FP-1 entered that corridor, vanishing completely from every screen. 4 seconds invisible, 2 seconds exposed, then gone again. The second followed perfectly. The third, however, wavered. A tiny defect in its gyroscope made it drift 200 meters off course. The Russians had recently randomized their radar timing, closing that gap. The third drone burned fuel correcting, slipping through seconds before the corridor sealed. A blip appeared on one operator's screen. He saw something small and fast, but chose to ignore it. He was busy tracking the massive decoy assault near Sevastopol. The log read, "Probable bird." That single decision saved Ukraine's mission. As dawn neared, the FP-1s raced across fog-laden seas. The temperature inversion bent Russian radar beams upward, making the low-flying drones effectively invisible. By 6:02 a.m., they were within 240 kilometers. The Russians deployed electronic countermeasures. The R-330 Zhetel system, broadcasting fake GPS coordinates to lure the drones off course. The FP-1's simple software almost fell for it. Almost. Then their cameras found a familiar shape on the horizon, an oil platform, exactly where it should be. They reset their bearings using visual navigation, ignoring the false data. But not all survived. The second FP-1's GPS module failed completely, a cheap capacitor freezing in the cold. Its inertial system drifted until it vanished into the sea at 6:45. No explosion, no trace. 2 drones remained. At 7:00 a.m., the spy ship's crew finally noticed something strange. Their own jammers were blinding them. The R-984UM defensive system filled the air with electromagnetic noise to block incoming threats, but it also jammed their radar. Screens flickered with static. Ghost echoes filled the scopes. To fix it, they turned up power and made themselves an even brighter target. The Russians called this electromagnetic fratricide. They were fighting themselves. At 7:23, one operator picked up a weak-moving target, 15 kilometers away. He tried to lock radar on it, but couldn't. The signal was too soft, the return inconsistent. He marked it again. Possible bird. The FP-1 flew on. At 7:25, the sea was wrapped in fog. Inside the Russian vessel, things were calm. They believed the danger had passed. Most drones, they assumed, were destroyed or misdirected. Then came the first faint blip. A radar tech leaned forward, frowned, and saw it vanish again. He didn't know it was already too late. The lead FP-1 was just over a kilometer away, camera locked on target. A patrol boat spotted it visually and opened fire. Tracers tore across the surface, punching holes in the plywood. One round clipped the propeller, sending violent shudders through the craft, but it held together. 90 seconds of fuel remained. The drone kept coming. The patrol boat radioed, "Contact confirmed. Small drone inbound." On the bridge, officers shouted orders and scanned west, toward the supposed threat. None looked north, where the second unseen FP-1 was lining up its final run. At 7:33, the damaged lead drone broke through the fog, wobbling toward the ship. The crew saw it, panicked, fired again, and watched as it hit the water 30 meters short. Relief spread through the bridge until they heard another sound, faint but rising, a steady buzz cutting through the mist. The third FP-1 was coming from the port side, low and fast, invisible to radar, undetectable by heat. By the time a lookout shouted, "Drone! Drone!" it was already 300 meters out. The ship's guns couldn't angle low enough to shoot. Their radar couldn't track something below 5 degrees. The drone centered its camera on the base of the mast, the ship's brain, housing the R-381T antennas and radar systems, and hit. The explosion was instant. A 25-kilogram warhead tore through the bridge, melting metal, igniting fuel lines, and throwing operators from their stations. The radar arrays folded, the mast twisted like tin, and the ship went dark. Flames chewed through cables, power grids shorted, ammunition lockers blew. Within seconds, the vessel was deaf and blind. The systems that could once hear whispers from entire countries away were gone. The Ukrainian operators watching from afar saw a final flash of data on their screens. Then, silence. Mission complete. By sunrise, the spy ship drifted powerless, its hull intact, but its soul destroyed. The Black Sea's most advanced listener had gone mute. 6 weeks of intelligence erased in seconds. On shore, Ukrainian teams launched new drones, fresh coordinates, random intervals, unpredictable patterns. The Russians tried to retaliate, firing missiles at supposed launch sites based on outdated data. They hit nothing. Empty fields, abandoned beaches, ghosts. Within hours, Ukraine's invisible fleet was operating freely again. The Russians were stunned. How could plywood drones outwit their sensors? How could radar, heat, and signal tracking all fail at once? The answer was arrogance. The belief that machines could not be deceived. The Ukrainians hadn't fought physics. They had used it. They turned temperature, timing, and interference into weapons. Their victory wasn't just tactical, it was philosophical. It proved that in modern war, creativity can overpower complexity. When salvage crews finally boarded the damaged vessel, they found the melted remains of the R-381T antennas fused into grotesque shapes, drooping like wax. Someone joked it looked like a Salvador Dali sculpture. But there was nothing surreal about what had happened. The ship that once ruled the electromagnetic spectrum was now a ghost, stripped and silent. It would sail again, repainted and repaired, but never as what it once was. Its electronic eyes were gone forever. For the Ukrainians, the message was clear. Adaptation is survival. For the Russians, it was humiliation. Millions in technology undone by 3 handmade drones. And for the world, it was a warning. The battlefield had changed, no longer dominated by size or steel, but by invisibility and ingenuity. The Black Sea became a proving ground for a new kind of warfare, one where the deadliest strike is the one you never see coming. In the end, the ocean returned to silence. The fog lifted. The wreck drifted. But the echoes of that night would ripple through every navy and intelligence agency on Earth. Because in the invisible war, fought in signals, shadows, and silence, even the smallest ghost can change